The air in the federal courtroom crackled, not with the usual hushed anticipation, but with a simmering tension that could ignite at any moment. Judge Richard Grayson, his face a thundercloud, slammed his gavel. "No coffee in my court," he roared, the sound echoing off the mahogany-paneled walls. The young clerk, barely out of law school, flinched. His hands, already trembling, nearly dropped the steaming cup. He set it down with a clatter, the porcelain a stark contrast to the dark wood. He turned, face flushed a mortified crimson, and addressed the silent gallery. Tell that legal team. 2 minutes late and I'll charge them with contempt." No one dared to breathe, let alone speak, above a whisper. Grayson had a reputation. A notoriously harsh, unforgiving judge. But today he was a ticking time bomb, fueled by caffeine deprivation, and something far more sinister. The bomb's timer seemed to accelerate when JD Vance, the Vice President of the United States, walked in. Vance was there as a witness for Faith and Freedom Church, a small, unassuming religious group. They were locked in a David and Goliath legal battle with Horizon Realty, a corporate behemoth, over a disputed plot of land where the church had built its modest chapel. Vance, ever since his Senate days, had been a vocal champion of religious freedom, vowing to shield groups like Faith and Freedom from the crushing forces of corporate greed. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Grayson shot a glance, a fleeting, suspicious glance, at James Peterson, Horizon Realty's smug, slick-haired representative. Peterson was twirling a heavy gold ring on his finger, a faint smirk playing on his lips. The unspoken question hung in the air. What was the vice president doing here? The vice president is here, the clerk stammered, his voice barely audible. Grayson sneered, his voice a venomous hiss that seemed to slither through his gritted teeth. "Oh, how special. Tell him this isn't the White House. Titles mean nothing here." Vance approached the bench calmly, offering a respectful nod to the court staff. But his eyes, usually warm and engaging, were now razor-sharp, scanning the room with an intensity that sent a shiver down the spines of those present. The courtroom fell deathly silent, the only sound the rhythmic, unsettling tap, tap, tap of Grayson's fingers on the polished wood of the bench. The audience held its breath, a collective silent prayer for the storm to pass. Attorney Emily Carter, representing Faith and Freedom Church, clutched her files, her knuckles white. In the press section, reporter Mark Sullivan discreetly activated his camera, the tiny red light a silent promise of a story unfolding. Grayson sank into his judge's chair, his body taut as a drawn bowstring. "Let's begin," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. But the fact that he refused, pointedly, to meet Vance's gaze hinted at a deeper conflict, a dark secret itching to burst free. This wouldn't be a simple legal battle. It would be a merciless war. The courtroom sank into a stifling silence as JD Vance stepped onto the witness stand, his polished shoes clicking steadily on the wooden floor. His gaze was steady, unwavering, even as Judge Richard Grayson's predatory eyes seemed to devour him. "Swear him in," Grayson barked, his voice cutting through the silence like a shard of glass. Vance raised his right hand, his left resting on the Bible the clerk offered. Then, slowly, deliberately, he made the sign of the cross. Forehead, chest, left shoulder, right shoulder. It was a simple gesture, yet loaded with meaning. A quiet, powerful declaration not just of his personal faith, but of his solidarity with Faith and Freedom Church, the very group he had come to defend. Grayson erupted. He leaped from his chair, his face contorted in a mask of purple rage. "What are you doing?" he bellowed, his gavel crashing down on the bench with a force that threatened to split the wood. "This is contempt of court. I fine you $10,000 on the spot." His voice rasped, his eyes bulging, as if he wanted to physically swallow Vance whole. "This isn't a church. There's no room for superstitious nonsense here." The room buzzed with shocked murmurs. Emily Carter, at the defense table, shot to her feet. "Your Honor, I object. That's his religious freedom," she protested, her voice trembling but firm. But Grayson waved her off dismissively, swatting her words away like an annoying fly. "Quiet, Carter, I'm the law here." Vance, still standing tall, his posture unwavering, spoke in a low, steady voice. "Your Honor, I'm here to testify in defense of Faith and Freedom Church against Horizon Realty. The sign of the cross honors that commitment, a commitment protected by the First Amendment." The crowd shivered, awed by his calm defiance in the face of Grayson's fury. But Grayson scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The First Amendment? Spare me your political sermons, Vance. Apologize now or I'll throw you in a cell." Vance locked eyes with Grayson, a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "I won't apologize for my faith, Your Honor." The tension in the room was a taut, vibrating string, stretched to its breaking point. Emily Carter gripped her hands together, her eyes flashing with a flicker of hope. Reporter Mark Sullivan, in the corner, edged his camera closer, the lens focused intently on Grayson. The judge slammed his gavel again, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Who do you think you are? Some vice president? Here, you're nothing." A quick, almost involuntary glance, Grayson darted it towards James Peterson, Horizon's representative, who sat with a faint, knowing smile. Didn't escape Vance's notice. "Your Honor," Vance said, his voice still calm, but with a sharp, cutting edge. "I am here to tell the truth about this case. Or are you fining me to protect something more personal?" Grayson froze, his hand trembling on the gavel. What are you implying?" he snarled, but his anxious eyes betrayed him. Vance tilted his head, as if carefully weighing his next words. Then he pressed on. "Just asking, Your Honor. Faith and Freedom Church has legal permits for that land. But Horizon Realty, with your backing, seems desperate to erase them. Why?" The crowd held its breath, a collective gasp hanging in the air. Grayson pounded the desk, his voice rising to a near scream. "Silence! I won't hear slander from a conservative like you." Emily Carter jumped in. "Your Honor, we have proof that the church legally owns the land." But Grayson cut her off, his voice shrill and desperate. "I said silence! That evidence is irrelevant!" He turned back to Vance, his fingers shaking. "You want to play this game? Fine, one more word and I'll have you dragged out." Vance offered a faint smile. Not smug, but the quiet confidence of a man holding a much stronger hand. "Your Honor," he said, "if you don't want the truth, why are you so afraid of me speaking?" Grayson nearly lost it. He hammered the gavel relentlessly, the sound echoing like thunder in the tense courtroom. "Court officers!" he bellowed, but the officers hesitated, sensing that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Mark Sullivan whispered urgently into his microphone. "You're watching live. Judge Grayson just fined Vice President Vance for crossing himself. This is about to blow up." The audience stirred, a restless sea of murmurs and uneasy glances. Some began pulling out their phones, ready to record whatever unfolded. Grayson panted, his face a mottled red, as if he were about to burst. "You think you can waltz in here, pull religious stunts, and challenge me?" he roared. "I'm the law. I decide." But Vance didn't flinch. He stepped forward, half a pace, his voice low but resonant. "Your Honor, the law isn't a tool for personal gain. Fine me for my faith if you want, but the truth about Horizon Realty and you won't vanish that easily." The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, ready to explode. The air was thick with the tension between JD Vance, standing tall and resolute, and Judge Richard Grayson, whose authority was visibly crumbling. Grayson slumped into his chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the gavel, his eyes flickering between fury and a growing, palpable fear. Vance, still on the witness stand, remained unshaken. He turned to the crowd, his voice deep and clear, resonating with conviction. "I'm here to testify for Faith and Freedom Church, a small group being sued by Horizon Realty for building on land they legally own. But it seems the truth isn't welcome here." Grayson banged the desk, cutting him off. "Enough! I don't need your speeches." Attorney Emily Carter sprang up, waving a thick stack of papers. Your Honor, we have building permits from the local government, signed 3 years ago. Horizon Realty has no claim. Grayson spun towards her, his face twisted with rage. I said that's irrelevant. Sit down or I'll charge you with contempt. Emily stiffened, her back ramrod straight, but her eyes blazed with defiance. Vance picked up, his voice sharper now, the edge honed by Grayson's blatant disregard for justice. Irrelevant, Your Honor. Then why is Horizon so intent on tearing down a church to build a mall, when the permits clearly favor the church? Grayson roared, I don't need your stupid questions. But Vance didn't stop. He locked eyes with Grayson, his gaze unwavering. Or is it because Horizon has another reason? One tied to you. The room erupted in whispers. James Peterson, Horizon's representative, shifted uncomfortably in his seat in the front row, his fingers tightening on his gold ring. Grayson shouted, Shut up! You don't get to question me! But his fleeting glance at Peterson, a glance filled with panic, fooled no one. Vance calmly pulled a paper from his briefcase, holding it up for all to see. This is a bank transfer copy. $50,000 from Horizon Realty to an offshore account. The date matches your ruling 6 months ago against another religious group in Ohio. Quite a coincidence, Your Honor. The crowd exploded in a cacophony of shocked chatter. Emily Carter's jaw dropped, her hand shaking on her files. Reporter Mark Sullivan hissed into his live stream microphone, Folks, Vice President Vance just dropped a bombshell. Judge Grayson took money from Horizon. Grayson pounded the gavel frantically, his face crimson. Seize that paper! Now! He screamed at the court officers. 2 uniformed men stepped forward but hesitated, their eyes darting between Vance and Grayson, a silent question hanging in the air. I'm ordering you! Grayson bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. But Vance raised a hand, stopping them. His tone was a quiet warning. Your Honor, take it if you want. I've got more copies. And emails. Want me to read them aloud? Grayson froze, his hand trembling on the desk. You're slandering me, he stammered, but the sheer panic in his eyes betrayed the truth. Vance pressed on, his voice low, but razor sharp. I'm not slandering you, Your Honor. I'm testifying. Because Faith and Freedom Church turned to me back when I was a senator. They showed me your unfair rulings, always favoring Horizon Realty. Now I see why. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Money, Your Honor. Money from Horizon bought your rulings. The courtroom descended into chaos. Someone in the audience yelled, Corruption! Mark Sullivan edged his camera closer, whispering, This is the truth coming out, folks. Emily Carter cut in, her voice trembling with a mixture of outrage and vindication. Your Honor, if you won't look at our permits, at least explain that money. Grayson spun towards her, his finger quaking. You dare question me? I'll jail you both. But his voice was weakening, as if he knew he was losing control, losing everything. Peterson bolted up, heading for the exit. But Vance's gaze stopped him cold. Don't rush off, Mr. Peterson, Vance said, his voice icy. I'm not done. Horizon Realty doesn't just want land. They want to wipe out any religious group in their way. And you, Your Honor, help them do it. Grayson slammed the desk one last time, screaming, Enough! I won't take this anymore. But his banging now sounded like a desperate, futile plea. The court officer stood still, unwilling to touch Vance. Mark Sullivan murmured into his live stream. Judge Grayson's crumbling. Vance has proof, and he's not backing down. The crowd's whispers grew louder, phones filming from every angle. The air crackled like a furnace, thick with the tension of a battle reaching its climax. JD Vance remained steadfast on the witness stand, his eyes locked on Judge Richard Grayson, who was rapidly unraveling. Grayson gasped for breath, pounding the desk like a man possessed, but his gaze now held not just anger, but a deep, primal fear. Vance, unflinching, raised the transfer paper again, his voice deep and cutting. Your Honor, I'm not finished. Horizon Realty didn't just pay you $50,000 for one ruling. I have emails between you and James Peterson, discussing how to remove Faith and Freedom Church from that land. Grayson shot up, pointing a trembling finger at Vance. "You're lying! That's fabricated!" But his voice broke, and the frantic glance he shot at Peterson was a silent confession. Vance pulled another stack of papers from his briefcase, flipping through them with the practiced ease of a seasoned lawyer. "Here. An email from last week. You wrote, 'The church has to go before they dig deeper.' Dig into what, Your Honor? The truth about your money?" The crowd erupted, shouts of corruption echoing from the back of the courtroom. Emily Carter, clutching her files, jumped in. "Your Honor, this is clear evidence. You have to answer." Grayson hammered the gavel nonstop, his face a grotesque mask of purple rage. "Shut up, everyone! Shut up!" But his voice was drowned out in the cacophony. Vance's words sliced through the noise like a blade. "I'll ask you again, Your Honor. How much did Horizon pay you to crush groups like Faith and Freedom Church? Just this case, or more?" Grayson screamed, his voice shattering. They paid me to handle them. I had no choice." He froze, his eyes widening in horror as he realized he had just dug his own grave. The room fell dead silent, the only sound his ragged breathing. Mark Sullivan, from the corner of the room, whispered into his live stream, "Can you hear this? Grayson just admitted to taking money from Horizon. This is explosive." His camera shook with excitement. Emily Carter leapt up. "Your Honor, you just confessed to corruption in front of the entire court." Grayson spun towards her, roaring, "How dare you! I'll throw you in jail with him!" But his threat now sounded like the cry of a desperate, cornered animal. Vance gave a faint smile, not smug, but the quiet confidence of someone holding the winning hand. "Your Honor," he said, "if you had no choice, why not say who's behind it, or are you more afraid of the truth coming out than I am?" Grayson pounded the desk, shouting, "Enough, officers, drag him out!" But the two court officers stood still, glancing at each other, unwilling to act. One whispered, "Your Honor, this doesn't feel right." Grayson bellowed, "I'm ordering you! I'm the judge!" But his authority was crumbling before everyone's eyes. Vance pressed on, his voice low but weighty. "Faith and Freedom Church isn't the first victim. I have a list. 3 other religious groups in Ohio, all ruled against by you after Horizon wired money. Want me to read it?" Peterson, in the front row, shot up again, his face pale. He bolted toward the door, but Vance called after him, his voice ice cold. "Sit down, Mr. Peterson. Grayson isn't the only one I want to question." Peterson froze, his hand gripping the doorknob, but he didn't dare leave. The crowd turned to stare, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Mark Sullivan hissed into his mic. "Peterson's about to flee, but Vance won't let him escape." Grayson, now fully unhinged, screamed, "Seize all his documents, now!" But the court officers didn't budge. The clerk, a young woman near the judge's bench, broke into tears, her voice choking. He forced me to destroy evidence. He said he'd ruin me if I didn't." She covered her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. The room erupted, shouts of "traitor" rising from the audience. Emily Carter turned to Vance, whispering, "You did it. He's finished." Vance looked at Grayson, his voice still calm, but unrelenting. "Your Honor, you didn't just sell rulings. You sold your conscience. Faith and Freedom Church came to me because they knew you weren't fair. And now, the whole country will know." Grayson collapsed into his chair, his hands trembling on the gavel. But he didn't strike it. He panted, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. You have no right," he stammered, but his words were so faint no one caught them. Mark Sullivan edged his camera closer, whispering, "Grayson's completely falling apart. Vance has emails, a list, and now the clerk's turned on him." The audience raised phones, filming every second. Someone yelled, "Put him on trial!" Grayson turned to the officers, his voice hoarse. "Do something! Arrest him!" But no one moved. His power had evaporated. Vance stood there, his gaze steady, like a warrior delivering the final blow. He knew he wasn't just defending Faith and Freedom Church. He was exposing a vast web of corruption. Grayson stared at him, his eyes clouded with fear. "You think you've won," he whispered, but his voice was the groan of a defeated man. Vance replied, his voice deep. No, Your Honor. Justice is the winner. The courtroom was now an arena, the audience's shouts echoing off the walls. Judge Richard Grayson slumped into his chair, his trembling hands dropping the gavel. JD Vance stood on the witness stand, his eyes icy, his voice low and resounding, like a final judgment. Your Honor, you just admitted to taking Horizon Realty money to suppress Faith and Freedom Church. Anything left to say? Grayson gasped, his eyes darting like a trapped beast. He slammed the desk, yelling, "Everyone, shut up! I order him removed!" But his voice was feeble, lost in the chaotic noise. The officers, 2 uniformed men near the door, didn't budge. One muttered to his colleague, "I'm not touching him." Grayson whirled toward them, roaring, "What are you doing just standing there? I'm the judge. Drag him out, now!" But they only lowered their heads, stepping back, clearly no longer seeing him as in charge. The audience exploded, cries of "resign" and "corruption" filling the room. Mark Sullivan, from his live stream corner, whispered into his mic, "Folks, Grayson's losing everything. The officers won't obey him anymore." Grayson, his face purple, shot up, pointing at Vance. "Who do you think you are to judge me? I have judicial immunity. I'm the law here." But Vance didn't flinch. He pulled another stack of documents from his briefcase, holding it up. "This is a recording from your office, Your Honor. You threatened the clerk to destroy evidence in the Faith and Freedom Church case, and 3 others against religious groups. Want to hear it?" He pressed a button on a small device, and Grayson's voice crackled through the room. "Wipe out those church files or you're out of a job, and worse." The room went silent, then erupted in boos. The clerk, the young woman near the bench, sobbed harder. "It's him!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "He forced me. He said he'd ruin my life if I didn't obey." She clutched her face, tears soaking the desk. Emily Carter turned to Vance, whispering, "That recording, where'd you get it?" Vance replied quietly, "Just in case. Faith and Freedom Church suspected him for a while. They asked me to investigate." Emily nodded, her eyes flashing with victory. Grayson, now totally out of control, lunged to the edge of the bench, shouting, "It's fake! All of it's fake! I was forced!" He spun toward James Peterson, his fingers shaking. "Ask him Horizon made me do it! I didn't want to!" Peterson, ghostly pale, leapt up again, racing for the door. But nearby spectators blocked him, one yelling, "Sit down, you greedy pig!" Peterson stumbled back to his seat, his hands cradling his head, clearly knowing he couldn't escape. Vance stepped closer, his voice cutting through the din. "Your Honor, you blame Horizon, but you chose to take the money. You chose to destroy Faith and Freedom Church. You chose to ruin innocent people for personal gain." He paused, letting it sink in. "You weren't forced. You were greedy." Grayson screamed, his voice raw. "You don't get it! They have power! They'd ruin me if I didn't!" But his cry drowned in the crowd's jeers. Mark Sullivan shoved his camera closer, whispering, "Grayson's blaming Horizon, but no one buys it anymore. Vance is tearing him apart piece by piece." The audience raised phones filming Grayson's collapse. Someone shouted, "Put him on trial!" Grayson bolted for the door behind the bench, aiming for his chambers, but a neutral security guard blocked him. "Sir, please stop," the guard said, his voice firm. Grayson shoved him, yelling, "Get out of my way, I'm the judge!" But the guard didn't budge, holding the door firm. Grayson turned back, his face twisted, glaring at Vance like a mortal enemy. "You'll pay for this," he roared, but his voice was a hopeless whimper. Vance stood firm, replying, "No, Your Honor. You're the one who'll pay. Faith and Freedom Church came to me because they knew you sold out justice. Now the whole country sees it." He raised the documents again. "Everything here, transfers, emails, recordings, is legal. You can't run." The courtroom hit peak chaos. The audience jumped up, some clapping, others yelling for justice. Emily Carter rushed to hug the clerk, comforting her amid sobs. Mark Sullivan whispered into his live stream, "This is historic. Grayson's got no way out." Peterson sat still, his head bowed, his hands shaking. Grayson, now a hollow shell, collapsed into the judge's chair, his hands on his head. "You don't understand," he muttered, but no one heard. The crowd's shouts drowned it all out. "Corruption! Resign! Jail!" Grayson looked up one last time, his eyes murky, staring at Vance. "You think this is over?" he whispered. Vance replied, his voice cold. "Not yet, Your Honor, but for you it might be." Suddenly, the courtroom's main doors burst open. Crisp footsteps rang out. Pam Bondi, the U.S. Attorney General, strode in, her blonde hair glinting under the lights, her eyes icy as they swept over Grayson. Behind her were 5 federal agents in black uniforms, badges gleaming. The crowd fell silent, heads turning, some whispering, "Bondi's here!" Mark Sullivan, from his live stream corner, shouted into his mic, "Folks, Pam Bondi just walked in. This is about to end." His camera swung to Bondi as she marched to the center. Grayson's eyes widened in horror. What are you doing here?" he stammered, his hands clutching the desk as if clinging to his last shred of power. Bondi stopped, her voice like ice. "Richard Grayson, I'm here to arrest you for corruption, abuse of power, and violating the constitutional rights of dozens of citizens, including Faith and Freedom Church." She held up a thick stack of papers, her voice ringing. "We have it all. Bank transfers, emails, recordings, everything Vance just presented and more." Grayson lunged to the edge of the bench, shouting, "You can't do this! I have judicial immunity. I'm a federal judge." But Bondi cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. "Your immunity ended when you sold rulings to Horizon Realty. You're not a judge, you're a criminal." She signaled the agents, and 2 stepped forward, cuffs in hand. Grayson stumbled back, knocking his chair over, screaming, "Stay back! I have connections. You'll all pay." But the agents didn't hesitate. One grabbed his arm, the other snapped cuffs on his wrists with a resounding click. The crowd erupted in applause, shouts of "Justice!" echoing through the room. Emily Carter hugged the clerk, both crying in relief. Mark Sullivan whispered into his live stream, "Grayson's cuffed, right at the bench. Bondi's not messing around." Grayson thrashed, yelling, "This is a conspiracy! Trump and his conservative cronies set me up!" But Bondi stepped closer, locking eyes with him. "No, Grayson. You set yourself up when you took Horizon's money. We're just here to clean up your mess." Vance stepped down from the stand, approaching Bondi. She turned to him, nodding slightly. "Thank you, JD. The evidence you gathered from Faith and Freedom Church helped us build this case." Vance replied, his voice low. "I just did what's right, ma'am. They needed someone to stand up." Bondi gave a faint smile, then turned back to Grayson. "You should thank Mr. Vance for giving you a chance to confess earlier. But you chose wrong." Grayson, his face twisted, shouted one last time, "You don't get it. Horizon has a network. They won't spare me." Bondi shrugged, then named them. "But for now, you're coming with us." The agents yanked Grayson from the judge's chair. He stumbled, his black robe tearing at the corner as they dragged him down the aisle. The audience rose, clapping wildly, some raising phones to film Grayson's humiliating exit. James Peterson, in the front row, shrank in his seat, his eyes downcast, knowing he was next. Bondi faced the crowd, her voice ringing like a proclamation. "Today we send a clear message. No one is above the law. Not a judge, not a corporation. No one." Mark Sullivan shouted into his live stream, "Did you see that? Bondi just took Grayson down, on the spot. This is real justice." The applause drowned out Grayson's struggles as he was hauled to the door. Vance stood there, his eyes fixed on Bondi, still holding a stack of documents. He knew this wasn't just a win for Faith and Freedom Church. It was the first step in a bigger fight. Bondi stepped closer to him, saying quietly, "Horizon won't stop here. You ready?" Vance nodded. "Always, ma'am." Grayson dragged through the doorway, turned back one last time, his eyes bloodshot, glaring at Vance. "You think you've won? Someone else will take my place." But his voice was swallowed by the door slamming shut. The room fell silent for a second, then erupted in cheers. Emily Carter rushed to hug Vance, whispering, "Thank you. The church is saved." Vance patted her shoulder. "Not over yet, Emily, but today's a start." Bondi stood in the center, her icy gaze sweeping over Peterson, then back to the crowd. "This isn't the end. The Justice Department will clean this system, starting with Grayson. The applause roared again, louder than ever. Mark Sullivan wrapped his live stream with an excited tone. Grayson's done, and Bondi just made today historic. Like and subscribe to catch what's next. Vance stood there, his gaze resolute, knowing the price of truth had been paid, and justice had finally prevailed. Cheers of "Justice, woo!" and "Corruption's dead" echoed off the walls as the audience leapt up, some hugging through tears. JD Vance stood at the center, his eyes steady, still gripping the documents that toppled Grayson. Pam Bondi, Attorney General, stood nearby, nodding to him before addressing the crowd, her voice resounding. "This case will be suspended to investigate Horizon Realty." Justice spoke today. Emily Carter rushed to hug Vance, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Vice President," she whispered, her voice choked. "Faith and Freedom Church is saved. We don't know how to repay you." Vance patted her shoulders, smiling faintly. "No repayment needed, Emily. I did this because it's right, because people like you and your church deserve protection." Emily nodded, turning to the clerk, the young woman still sobbing, and hugged her again, comforting her. "You're not alone. We made it through." Mark Sullivan from the corner shouted into his live stream, "You just saw Grayson get arrested. Vance and Bondi made history. Faith and Freedom Church wins big." He raised his camera, capturing the crowd's spontaneous applause, some holding up phones to share the moment online. His video spread like wildfire. The title, "Vice President Vance Takes Down Corrupt Judge," quickly trending. James Peterson, Horizon Realty's rep, sat frozen in his chair, his head bowed, his hands trembling. He knew escape was impossible as Bondi glanced his way, her stare cold as ice. Vance stepped off the witness stand, sitting in an empty chair near Emily. He scanned the courtroom, his gaze lingering on Grayson's former spot. Now just an empty chair and a gavel rolling on the floor. He said softly, "Just for Emily. I've seen guys like Grayson back home in Ohio, people using power to crush others." He paused, his voice deepening. "In Hillbilly Elegy, I wrote about how faith and community saved me from despair. Today I made the sign of the cross, not just for me, but for Faith and Freedom Church, for people who believe in what's right." Emily looked at him, her eyes bright. "You really believe justice can win, no matter how strong the opponent?" Vance nodded. "I do, because I've seen it happen. Grayson thought money and power would shield him, but truth is stronger. He sold out justice, and now the price has come." He glanced at the door where Grayson was dragged off, adding, "Today didn't just save your church. It sent a message to every corrupt player. They can't hide forever." The applause tapered off, but the air still buzzed with joy and hope. An older man in a worn jacket approached Vance, shaking his hand. "Thank you, sir. I'm from a small church in Ohio. Horizon's been squeezing us too. You gave us hope." Vance gripped his hand firmly. "Keep fighting, all right? We're not done." The man nodded, his eyes misty, then returned to his seat, whispering to his neighbor, "He's the real deal." Mark Sullivan rushed over, thrusting a mic forward. "Vice President Vance, how do you feel after this victory?" Vance looked at him, smiling faintly. "I wouldn't call it my victory, Mark. It's a win for Faith and Freedom Church, for the people Grayson crushed, and for justice. I just did my part." Mark nodded, turning to the camera. "You hear that? Vance says it's justice's win. Like this video if you agree." Emily stood beside Vance, asking quietly, "What do you think happens to Horizon after this?" Vance replied, "They'll be investigated. And if Bondi does what I know she can, they'll fall like Grayson. But we've got to stay sharp. People like them always try to come back." He looked at her, adding, "You and the church keep fighting. I'll always have your back." Emily smiled. "We won't give up. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart." The courtroom quieted as the audience filtered out, but the energy of a day that changed everything lingered. Vance stood, adjusting his suit, his eyes on the door where Bondi had exited with the agents. He knew today was just the beginning. Grayson was one piece, and the corruption web stretched deeper. He whispered to himself, "Justice doesn't stop here." Then, he walked out, ready for the next fight, as the final applause echoed behind him. Outside the courthouse, sunlight blazed as Pam Bondi stood before a sea of mics and cameras, her blonde hair gleaming, her icy eyes piercing the throng of jostling reporters. JD Vance stood a few steps away, his gaze steady, his hands in his suit pockets, quietly watching. Applause still drifted from inside as the crowd exited. But now, all eyes were on Bondi. She raised a hand, signaling silence, then spoke, her voice like steel. Today, we witnessed the fall of Richard Grayson, a corrupt judge who sold justice to Horizon Realty. But this isn't the end. It's the first step in the Justice Department's campaign to clean up America's judicial system. Reporters buzzed, mics rising higher. Bondi continued, "We've identified at least 5 other judges tied to Horizon Realty, taking money to rule against religious groups and small businesses. Grayson's just the tip of the iceberg. The Justice Department, under President Trump's leadership, won't relent. We'll investigate, prosecute, and ensure no one's above the law." She paused, staring into the cameras. Horizon Realty will be dragged into the light. They can't hide forever. Mark Sullivan, in the crowd, shouted into his live stream, "You hear that? Bondi just declared war on corruption. 5 more judges are in the crosshairs." His camera shook with excitement. Online viewers commenting frantically, "Real justice." "Trump and Bondi mean business?" A reporter raised a hand. "Miss Bondi, what about the Faith and Freedom Church case?" Bondi answered instantly, "The lawsuit's suspended. That church is innocent, and we'll ensure they're protected. Grayson and Horizon have failed." Vance stood there, his eyes locked on Bondi. He knew this wasn't just talk. It was a promise. A promise he and Bondi had quietly built since he handed over Grayson's evidence. He thought of Faith and Freedom Church, of people like Emily Carter and the old man from Ohio who'd put their faith in him. Bondi glanced his way, a subtle nod of thanks, then pressed on. "Vice President Vance played a crucial role today. He didn't just defend a church. He helped us expose a corruption network. This proves this administration stands with the people." Reporters cheered, some clapping. Mark Sullivan jumped in. "Vance and Bondi, the justice duo, folks. This is why we need them." Bondi raised her hand again, her voice firm. "We're not stopping. If you think you can bribe judges or bury the truth, hear this. Your time's up." She turned, heading for the agent's car, leaving the crowd buzzing with questions and applause. Vance stepped away from the throng, walking to a waiting black SUV. He paused, glancing back at the courthouse one last time. Emily's words echoed in his mind. "We won't give up." He smiled faintly, knowing today wasn't just a win over Grayson. It was the spark for a bigger fight. He opened the door, slid in, his gaze steady ahead. The driver asked, "To the White House, sir?" Vance nodded. "That's right, plenty more to do." Mark Sullivan wrapped his live stream, his voice electric. "Grayson's arrested, Horizon targeted, and Bondi just announced the biggest crackdown yet. If you believe in justice, like this video and subscribe to keep up. We're not done." The screen went dark, but the crowd's applause lingered in the air. Vance, in the car, whispered to himself, "Not done indeed." He knew the corruption web ran deep. But today, justice had laid the first brick. The dramatic courtroom takedown of Judge Richard Grayson, orchestrated by Vice President JD Vance and Attorney General Pam Bondi, wasn't just a victory for Faith and Freedom Church. It was a stark reminder of a persistent threat to American justice: judicial corruption. But Grayson's case, while shocking, is far from an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a deeper malaise, and understanding its roots is crucial to safeguarding our legal system. The battle against judicial corruption is a long and arduous one, but it's a battle worth fighting. The integrity of our legal system, the foundation of our democracy, depends on it. JD Vance and Pam Bondi's actions in the Grayson case showed that even the most entrenched corruption can be exposed and challenged. It's a reminder that vigilance, persistence, and a commitment to truth are our most powerful weapons. What are your thoughts on judicial corruption? What steps do you think are most important to ensure a fair and impartial judiciary? Share your opinions in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more updates on this crucial issue.